My mom's been with this new guy. His name's Paul. But I'll tell you right now, the second he came into my life, I started getting these red flags. Red alerts, red alerts. I knew he was bad. He was bad news. So I came up with a plan. Sort of, tell my father my gut instincts about this guy, and we came up with something that's going to leave my mom so mad. Let me tell you about it. I'm 18, female, and I've lived with my mother ever since I was 7. My parents have gotten a divorce then, and my mom ended up with me. The house and the child support, my dad wasn't always in the States, but whenever he was, he came to visit. I got along with my dad well, but for some reason my parents always argued when they met each other. Dad would complain about my mom giving more attention to material things than me, and she would fight back because this was just the kind of person my mom was. I was closer to my absent dad than my mom, who was always with me. Unfortunately, Mom could not care enough to do anything about it. My dad was right about my mother and her neglect, and something I'd gotten used to. Right from my childhood years, my mother would leave me all alone at home with a bunch of instructions. I thought that it was normal at first, but my elementary school teacher found out and went out of her way to talk to my mom about it. That night, I got an earful and made a promise to keep whatever happened in my home to myself. I don't know when it happened, but I grew more reserved. My dad noticed this quickly, and my mom argued that it was a sign of maturity. When I was 13, I came to know that my mom disliked me because I looked like my dad. The only resemblance I had with my mom was my ears and smile. Other than those, I look like my dad in every way. 3 years ago, I had a fairly long discussion with my mom. It's not common because my mom is hardly ever at home, and whenever she was, I never really cared to talk to me unless she needed me. At that age, I fully understood I was a means to an end for her and begged her to let me be with my dad. She didn't want me, and I knew I'd prefer staying with my dad. I'd even written up a list of reasons why leaving would benefit her. Again, like everything is with my mom, it was pointless. I grew to ignore my mom in my late teens, and we peacefully coexisted in my house. It came in handy, especially now that I'm done with high school. I decided to take a gap year before college to work on myself, and I'm not too bright, and I don't have good social skills. Since I was in the house all the time, I put in effort to avoid my mom as much as I could, and tried not to cause any problems whatsoever. I did most of what she asked me to do without complaining, and sometimes got compliments because I was so docile. Yes, my mom had called me that a few times in the past. My little plan worked out well for me, and that was until my mom brought home her new boyfriend, Paul. My mom has had a handful of boyfriends in the past. I like just the 2 of them because they actually treated me like a human being, while the others saw me as a nuisance or just ignored me overall. But in Paul's case, it was different. From the very first day I met him, I had a bad feeling about him, and hoped things between him and my mom would end soon. To my dismay, Mom liked him a lot. Paul was very good-looking, and I later came to know that he was loaded after bragging about his wealth when I was around. It explained everything, and at some point I felt sorry because my mom was only dating him for his money. My sympathy soon evaporated when Paul became overly friendly. I really don't know how to explain this, but the attention I got from him creeped me out. It started with asking me to stay and have short discussions with him. I usually went into my room when Mom had a visitor, but Paul would tell me it was fine to stay with him for a short while. I didn't particularly enjoy it, but he didn't cross any boundaries, which was fine. Then the gifts he sent. It escalated from buying dinner for just my mom to both of us. After that, there were a few flowers and jewelry, and that was when I've had enough. I told him to focus on winning over my mom and stop with the gifts because I didn't like them. At this point, my mom gets upset with my outburst, but I wasn't going to change my mind. From that day, I stopped joining them, no matter how many times Paul prodded. My mom had not tried talking me into it, telling me that Paul had more money than my dad and that he would be happy with him. But I ignored her. I wasn't going to let her and her greed influence my decision. I'm not sure what happened, but I started seeing Paul less and less. I noticed this about a month ago. Last week, Mom told me they had a huge argument about my dad, and I learned about my dad was in the state. I don't know any details about the argument because it's really none of my business, so I didn't bother asking, but I did call my dad 2 days ago. I told him about Paul and how much I disliked him, and my dad sounded downright upset over the phone. He told me to stay away from Paul and promised to have a discussion with my mother later. Yesterday, I heard my mom yelling at someone over the phone. She was all dressed up, and I assumed it was Paul that she was talking to, but it turned out to be my dad. She was upset that I mentioned Paul in the first place, and got angry that my dad had warned her to keep Paul away or in things with him if she did not want him to take legal action. I did not apologize. I had no reason to, and saw nothing wrong with what I've done. But when I tried walking away, my mother pulled me back and started yelling profanities at me. I know I said that my mom's actions did not affect me much, but the things that she said to me aren't ones that I will ever forget. I retaliated, and we began to throw insults at each other until Paul arrived, and when my mom told him everything, he got upset as well. Paul told my mom to forget about child support since he was around to provide for her. Mom must have thought it was a joke and laughed, which further upset Paul. I used the opportunity to retreat to my room and lock myself in there. It took a long time before I was able to fall asleep. Was my mom going to listen to my dad and end things with Paul? My best guess is that she'll remain stubborn because that's just my mother. I just hope my mom doesn't act too rashly. Update number 1. The argument between Paul and my mom continued even after the night of our argument. I made sure always to leave the house whenever Paul visited because I ended up hearing shouting. If it were late at night, I'd blast music in my ears. A neighbor even came over to complain to me once when I was the only one at home. I apologized on my mother's behalf and then decided to speak to my mom about the fights that she kept having with Paul. I thought that she would hear me out because my neighbor had promised to call the police if they heard any more yelling late at night. I ended up regretting sitting my mom down to talk. When I told her everything, she told me it was my fault for going to my dad and, quote, blabbing about things I made up in my head. It was a shocker, and my mom's lack of accountability almost made me laugh at her. She told me that Paul had been asking if she still loved my father and secretly wanted to get back with him. Even I knew it was a ridiculous question. Apparently, Paul's insecurity stemmed from the fact that my mom refused to let go of the money my dad paid for child support, and so was not willing to leave my dad alone just yet. When my mom started acting out in her anger, I went to my room, and I didn't want to get hurt by accident. Paul came over to visit a couple times, and my mom was around only once, which was the first time. She ended up staying outside for hours trying to avoid Paul. I didn't mind it at first because I was all alone in the house, but Paul asked to come in 2 weeks ago after I had informed him that my mother was absent. He told me he would wait for her inside the house, and I was pretty tempted to tell him to wait outside in his car, but I pitied him and let him in. I went to my room and stayed there alone. This happened 2 more times, and the last time, Paul asked me to stay with him before I could escape to my bedroom. I asked if he needed anything, and he told me he had been quiet about my rude behavior. I was pretty close to running out of the house, and that man really scares me. But Mom walked in, and I left them to sort out their differences and locked myself in the bedroom. I called my dad 4 days ago. I tried to stop myself from telling him everything, but it was hard to do so. I told him all about Mom and her fights with both Paul and me, and as usual, Dad was quiet and listened to everything I had to tell him. He apologized on my mom's behalf before asking if it was okay to stay with him. I didn't understand at first, but when I finally did, I told him I would love to. Dad told me that he was going to try to gain full custody of me this time, and that Mom and Paul's relationship was going to be in his favor. He was finally going to settle down in my hometown and go to some lawyers to get their help. After my discussion with my dad, my mood drastically changed. I was happy for days and prayed that my dad's plan was going to succeed. I'd done some research and found that it was difficult for fathers to gain custody of their children. But I was 18 this time around. It wasn't going to be so easy for my mom now. Well, Paul came over 2 days ago, and this time I stayed in the kitchen, wanting to know what happened between them. I kept finding it hard that two grown adults were taking so much time to resolve a small fight. I doubt that they even paid me any attention. Paul was fuming the first time I saw him that angry. He told my mom to make a choice between him and me. My mom told him that he was being unreasonable, and he threatened to walk away if she did not give him an answer. It took a while, and I was so sure that my mom was going to pick me, right? She would find another Paul who would understand that she was going to keep me and the money that came from my dad after all. To my surprise, she picked Paul. I didn't know how to feel about everything. I mean, on one hand, I was bummed because my mom had picked a random man over her own daughter. Then, if things didn't work out for my dad, I might be getting Paul as a stepfather. On the other hand, it might make things easier for Dad. If his plan did not work out, I'd do my best to stay with him at every small opportunity. My mom's decision hurt a lot. Till today, I'm still struggling to get over it. Dad said that he would call later tonight, and that's the only thing that I'm looking forward to. Maybe he can make me feel better. Update number 2. I finally moved in with my father. The move was finalized yesterday, and there was quite some drama with my mom. The delay from the law and a few other obstacles, but my dad eventually gained full custody. My grandma had made me the largest dinner I've had in a while, and my dad promised to make up for all the lost time in between us. I told him he didn't have to, but truthfully, I wanted to see how different life was with my dad. I'm not sure what my dad had gone through regarding the law, and anytime I asked, he told me that it was all fine. I'm saying this because I really don't have any details. I can share regarding that. I met with a lawyer who talked me through the procedure and asked if I was sure I didn't want to stay with my mom anymore. I didn't hesitate to say yeah. After all, she had told Paul she wanted to be with him and could not care how I felt about it. The fights had stopped and Paul had returned to his old self. I did the same thing I usually did. I would walk out of the house or stay in my bedroom whenever Paul came over. I went out more, though, because my dad and I met at a nearby cafe most of the time. He had taken me to his place at some point, and I learned a lot about my dad that day. He didn't know how to cook, loved green, and was a sucker for sports, but never, ever really knew how to play any. I was good at volleyball back in high school and told my dad that I'd teach him if he was interested. We've played once and he's really bad, but it was a lot of fun. My mom wasn't so happy with my decision to stay with Dad. A part of me thinks it's because she's not getting anything from child support. When I told my dad everything I had overheard, he told me that my mom wasn't going to get money from him once he gained custody, and he had sounded so sure he was going to gain full custody, and in the end, he was right. I informed my mom about it first, though my dad did not want me to, and I had thought my mom would be happy after hearing the news. After all, she would be all alone with the man she chose over me and would not have to worry about my well-being so much, if she even did in the first place. My mom had called me an ungrateful, horrible daughter, and I told her I heard everything she had discussed with Paul about leaving me for him. I told her I'd rather live with my father than with a mother who only saw me as a means of extortion of money from her ex-husband. That earned me a few more insults, but I managed to hold in my tears, till I got to my room at least. After that day, I felt suffocated in my own house, so I took walks and stayed outside till nighttime. A few days before the court's final decision, my mom had told me that I was free to live with my dad. She said that me living with her was only going to be a burden and told me that she didn't care what happened to me anymore. You'd think I was used to these insults by now, but I wasn't. My happiness overshadowed my pain, though, and I was glad that I wasn't going to have any problems with my mom regarding living with my dad anymore. It had been about 2 weeks, and I had to be present in court once. But it was all done and over with, and I have not seen my mom since I've left the house. I wish I were happy that she had not even bothered to help me pack up, but I'm not. She had locked herself in her room while my dad loaded my things into the car. I didn't even get to tell her goodbye, and I don't know if I should have. I regret it, but it's clear that my mom wanted nothing more to do with me. She was probably laughing with Paul about her freedom as a single woman, and I'm honestly doing my best to get over this pain, but it's harder than I thought. And I wonder why. I'm happy with my grandma and dad, and they do everything they can to make me happy. When I'm with them, I'm just so happy. But when I'm alone, like I am now, I feel a strange kind of pain. I hate that I feel pain when my mom is most likely happy, and I think I'll have to talk to my dad about it. Well, he's been asking, and I've been telling him I'm fine. I'll drop an update if anything new happens to me. What's up, everybody? Mr. Reddito here. This is just a reminder, if you're enjoying the video, go ahead and click that subscribe button for daily videos. And I do have 2 more updates for you guys. It's about to have a little twist to it. Here's update number 3, and thank you for clicking that subscribe button. Not much has happened to me. I'm currently learning a tech skill, data analytics, and, well, since I've decided to take a gap year, and my dad is super supportive of it, he told me to try some tech out, when I talked about a part-time job, and while I thought that I'd be bad at it, I decided to give it a shot. My grandmother stays with me most of the time, and she's a really good storyteller and an even better cook. My dad told me that I could talk with him whenever I needed to get things off my chest, and I loved him even more because of it. He was a busy man, yet he still managed to make time for me. That was another difference between him and my mom. I found it hard to talk to my mom when I needed something important and had to muster up the courage to do so. I'm pretty sure that I could tell my dad to watch a movie with me, and he would as long as he wasn't working. While my life isn't really, taking any shocking turns lately, I can't say the same for my mother. Yeah. It started with some phone calls 2 weeks after I moved in with Dad. At first, I did not take any of her calls because I didn't want to talk to her, to be honest. I told my grandma about the calls first, and she asked for my mom's phone number so that she could say that she would ask my mom what she wanted on my behalf. I don't think she did anything of that sort, though. This is what I learned later on. Grandma mentioned it to my dad at dinner, and my dad said that he would talk to her. The next morning, my dad told me Mom wanted to check up on me and kept calling because she wanted to hear my voice. I would not have believed it if it had not come from my dad. I called my mom 2 days after that, and she sounded strange. She asked how I was doing and if she could visit, and I told her, sure, she could. And while my grandmother was against it, a little cajoling was more than enough. I saw Mom 4 days ago. She looked a bit stressed, but looked like she was trying to hide it. Mom told me to talk to my dad into giving her partial custody, and I told her I wasn't interested. She begged for some time, and when it was clear that I wasn't going to budge, she began to yell, forgetting my grandma was there. Grandma drove her out of the house with a cooking spoon. I'm not kidding. Later that night, I figured out why my mom was so adamant about me coming to stay with her for a bit. Apparently, she had even gone to court because she could not pay for child support. I thought Paul had left her, only to find out that Paul had problems with the law as well. Well, at least my confusion regarding my mom's sudden attitude change had been explained. I honestly don't know the gist of it all, but a woman had taken Paul to court for sexually harassing her teenage daughter. Can you believe that man turned out to be like that? I now feel more creeped out in the retrospect as I'm reminded of how I escaped his creepy vibe in the past. And even more surprising was finding out that Paul wasn't as rich as he claimed to be. I wonder how my mom managed to miss the second part, since she dated wealthy guys. For the first time, my mom was the used partner in her relationship, and she was in so much trouble as he was. Paul had managed to get my mom to put the house up as collateral, saying he needed some money for a new investment, but it was all a lie. Obviously, and now my mom is going to be homeless. She had turned to my dad for help in her desperation, which is how I got to know about all this. As for the creep, It would explain why I felt irritated around Paul. I'm glad I listened to my gut and avoided that man, though I would have done anything in my power to make sure he didn't have his way with me. I'm writing all this out because my dad asked for my opinion regarding the matter. He told me that if I wanted him to help out my mom, then he would without any hesitation at all. Well, while I think my mom simply does not deserve any help, she's still my mother. She's got unfortunates in her relationship, and if I decided not to help her out, she would literally be left to the streets. Guys, what would you do? Should I help out my mom who abandoned me and only reached out when she needed my help? Update number 4. Sit back. Paul has been arrested. A guy like him deserves to stay locked up in prison. I'm so glad he's not out there creeping other girls out, and in the end, I chose not to help mom out. I did ask my dad to give her some money, and I advised her to stay with granddad for some time till she could get her life back in order. I also told her that I did not want to see her again. While my actions might seem heartless to some people, I'd given it a lot of thought and decided this was the best thing for me. My mom only cared about herself and would never have contacted me if Paul wasn't in trouble. I didn't want anything to do with that kind of person. I'm also happy to see, and, well, I can say that the pain I've been feeling is almost close to non-existent now. It took some time. This should be close to 3 months now, but I don't feel horrible whenever I think about Mother. As for Paul, I think he got what he deserved. My dad told me he had a hunch when I told him about Paul the first time. A small part of me must have known this as well, but my mom wasn't so observant, sadly. I also got a small job as a data analyst. It's more of a learning opportunity like an intern. I thought I would not like being a techie, but I might consider studying a course in this field when I apply for college. Thank you guys for following me on this journey. Well, they do say you should always trust your gut instincts, your gut feelings, because your gut will lead you to the truth. And in this case, OP knew that something was up with this creep Paul, and it looks like at the end of the update number 4, Paul ends up in jail, where he belongs. Guys, I want to know your thoughts about this story, exactly your thinkings when Paul's going into the story and he starts doing all this creepy, inappropriate crap. And I want to shout out to OP's dad, who said, you know what, I think something's wrong too. So guys, drop your comments down below. Let's go ahead and discuss this story. If you're new to the channel, I want to welcome you and thank you for joining me today. My name's Mr. Reddito, and I narrate stories every single day. Drama stories, which could include HOA dramas, mother-in-law disputes, inheritance dramas, wedding fiascos, bridezillas. I mean, the list goes on and on. You're not going to want to miss these daily videos. Thank you once again. I'll see you tomorrow, and remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace.